Well, good morning, Crossway. I am so glad that you chose to join us this morning. Will you stand as we sing about the joy that the Lord brings to us? We worship the God who was. We worship the God who is. We worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors. He parted the raging sea. My God, He holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise. We sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause He hung upon that cross and He rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. And we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We shout out your praise.
We've just celebrated the joy of being in the house of the Lord, and that same joy leads us to declare His greatness. Let's read God's word together this morning. Come, let us sing for the joy of the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before Him with thanksgiving and extol Him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. Let's continue to sing together. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope and you restore
Good morning. You can have a seat. Welcome to Crossway. My name is Stacy. And whether this is your first time joining us or you've been here for decades, we are just very glad that you're here worshiping with us and learning more about Jesus. There's a couple things going on in our church family right now that I get to share with you. Right now we're in the season of deacon and elder nominations. This is an opportunity, one of the ways that we can kind of propel forward the future of our church by prayerfully identifying men who lead with wisdom and humility and a servant's heart. You know, our elders are the governing body of our church. They guide and they shepherd us spiritually. And our deacons are hands-on servant leaders that make ministry happen. And so we're going to nominate them. You'll see a nomination card in the back of the seat in front of you. And if you need a list to see who all is eligible, there's two ways to get that list. The list is digital, so you could take your phone and take the very tip of your phone and point it at the circle in the seat in front of you, and it will pull up the eligibility list. Or if you would like a printed out copy, our hospitality team can get you a printed out copy. Hospitality team wears yellow lanyards, so you can go see one of them after the service and get an eligibility list. But I want you to very prayerfully consider who our next deacon and elders should be and make your nominations. When you've filled out your nomination form, you can drop it in the offering bucket if you haven't done that fast, but if not, there are black boxes located all the way around the worship center, and you can just drop that form in one of those black boxes as you're leaving today. So speaking of servant leadership and ministry opportunities, we host an event called Second Saturday, and it's something that's been going on for a little while, but Second Saturday is, you guessed it, the second Saturday of the month, and we go and we minister. It's an outreach event into our community. So we provide meals for those that are hungry, provide clothing for those that are in need. And this last second Saturday that we hosted, we served more meals than we have ever served in the history of that event so far. Yeah. And even better, we were able to share the gospel 7 times. Isn't that incredible? Yeah, and I'm so grateful to you for making that happen. It's just incredible to me that your prayers and your time and your resources, your giving, your generosity, it doesn't just change lives physically, but it changes lives spiritually as well. I'm so grateful to be a part of a generous church. We're going to give now our tithes and offerings, and I want you to know that when you give, you are giving to things like Second Saturday. And you're giving to things like providing meals for those in need, clothing for those in need, and even more importantly, spiritual conversations for those that are in need of eternal Savior. So we're going to give our tithes and offerings. There's several ways that you can do that. There'll be people walking around with a black bucket, and you can drop your tithes and offerings in that black bucket. You can go online to crosswaychurch.com, and you can give securely by pressing the Give tab there. Also, the black bucket boxes that I mentioned that are all the way around the worship center, you can also drop off tithes and offerings in those black buckets on your way out as well. But will you please pray with me? God, thank you for this church. Thank you for the generosity of this church. They give so freely and so joyfully their time, their prayers, their resources. God, I just thank you that you use that and you do things like you accomplished in this second Saturday we just saw, where lives were changed because physical needs were met and spiritual needs as well. God, I pray that you'll continue to use what is given so sacrificially to continue to do that work in our community and around the world. God, I pray for our hearts right now that you'll begin softening them, to be willing to listen to what it is that you have to speak to us individually through Pastor TJ. God, I pray for the sermon, God, that you will anoint his words and that you will speak straight through him right to our hearts. God, convict us, change us. God, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable, God, I pray that it will result in change. God, we love you. We praise your name. Amen.
All right, well, good to see everybody this morning. I want you to just kind of know this. Yesterday, I was a State fan for about the span of 3 hours. And can we agree to something? When there's 30 seconds left on the clock, you're in field goal position, and all you need is a field goal to win the game. You don't pass the ball. Thank you for coming today. Let's pray and we'll go. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So we are continuing a sermon series that we are doing entitled More to the Story, where we are taking a look at what I believe are some of Jesus' most famous parables. And it occurred to me somewhere along the way in this sermon series that if you were to put a list together of what you believe are some of Jesus' most famous parables, your list might not match mine. So here's the good news. At some point down the road, if your list doesn't match mine, then we might preach on yours. But for now, we're kind of working my list, so that's the situation. But in case you don't know what a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. There are stories that Jesus told us that he completely made them up, but he did it in order to teach us a very important truth. And about a third of all the teachings of Jesus that we have in Matthew, Mark, and Luke are in parable form, which I think means that we should take these parables seriously, that we should pay attention to them, that we should wrestle with them, and that we should also be abundantly clear about what Jesus intended to communicate when he taught using these parables. Today, as we continue the sermon series, we're going to take a look at a parable that's known as the parable of the rich fool. But before we jump into it, I want to tell you about something. When I was in college, I went and saw a play called The Fiddler on the Roof. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have seen the play The Fiddler on the Roof? Okay, there's some of us, all right. Some of us are more cultured than others. But in the play, The Fiddler on the Roof, one of the main characters, a guy by the name of Tevye, sings a song called If I Were a Rich Man. And in the middle of that song, If I Were a Rich Man, he prayed a prayer to God that went like this: Dear God, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, that it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So, what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? Now, Tevye's friend told him after he sang that song and prayed that prayer, he said, listen, money is the world's curse. To which Tevye responded by saying, well, may the Lord smite me with it, and may I never recover. And perhaps there are some of you that feel that very same way today. It wouldn't break your heart if God were to smite you with great wealth and that you would never recover. Now, the reason why I point out that whole part of the play is because I think it's a little bit of a good illustration about the way that many people in our world think and the way that many people in our world live. Most of us would love to be wealthy. In fact, when you look around our culture, it seems like our culture at large is on this relentless pursuit of more. In our culture, we teach things like, or we subtly believe in things like, he who dies with the most toys wins. Now, of course, that isn't true. That's a lie. He who dies with the most toys, you know what happens to him? He dies, and that's it. You don't actually win at life if you die having a lot of money and a lot of stuff. But in our culture here in America, we tend to view success as somebody who has a lot of money, somebody who has a lot of stuff, somebody who lives a very certain type of lifestyle. But the parable we're going to look at today is, in that parable, what Jesus does is he addresses the foolishness of living your life on the pursuit of more. So if you have a Bible and you want to follow along, We're going to be in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. Before we jump into the passage that contains the parable that Jesus is going to tell, let me give you a little bit of context that will help some of this make a whole lot more sense to you. When we pull up on the scene in Luke chapter 12, we find that Jesus is preaching to a large crowd of people. In fact, Luke tells us that it numbers into the thousands. There are literally people everywhere surrounding Jesus, many of them kind of pushing in, trying their best to get a front row seat to be able to hear Jesus teach. And on this particular day, Jesus teaches on a number of important subjects. He talks to them about salvation. He talks to them about forgiveness. He talks to them about being faithful in the middle of persecution. And then when we get to verse 13, while all that is going on, we read, "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.'" So while Jesus is in the middle of teaching all of these people about all these important subjects, there's a man in the crowd who elbows his way through the crowd until he gets to the place where he feels like he's within earshot of Jesus. And he decides to interrupt Jesus. And what becomes very obvious about this man from the very beginning is that he is not at all interested in spiritual things. He's not interested in salvation. He's not interested in forgiveness. He's not interested in being faithful in the middle of persecution. He's not interested in eternity. He only is interested in something that is earthly in nature. So he interrupts Jesus and he says, "Teacher," which is kind of ironic because this man hasn't come to get any instruction whatsoever from Jesus. He says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, we're not really given a lot of information about this man's situation. We don't know the details and the nuances of what's going on, but what we do know is that he is in some sort of a legal dispute with his brother regarding his father's inheritance that he left behind for them. And it's pretty obvious right from the get-go that this man will not be happy until this situation gets resolved in the way that he wants it to be resolved. So he comes to Jesus and he asks Jesus, rather he actually demands from Jesus that Jesus resolve the situation. Now what he doesn't do is he doesn't tell Jesus, "Listen, I've got this thing going on with my brother. What I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is sit down with him and sit down with me and learn the facts of the situation and make a right and just judgment about the situation." No, what this man does is he demands, or really he commands Jesus to take his side against his brother. What he's trying to do is he's trying to use Jesus' moral authority to get one over on his brother regarding the inheritance. And of course, Jesus sees right through what this man is trying to do. So in the next verse, Jesus responds and we read, "Jesus replied, 'Man.'" And let me stop there for a moment because that's kind of strong right there. When Jesus says "man," it would be kind of like if you and I said, "Listen up, pal," or "Listen here, buddy," or maybe even "Listen up, knucklehead." Now, I don't think that Jesus would have called this guy a knucklehead, but he's clearly being a knucklehead, and since I'm not Jesus, I'm calling him a knucklehead. "Man," he said, "who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" So Jesus responds by asking a question that is meant to be a definitive rejection of what this guy is asking him to do. Jesus is telling this guy, "Listen, that is your business. I'm not getting involved with your family business. You guys need to go resolve that yourselves." Now, at first glance, it may seem like Jesus doesn't care about this guy or about his situation, like maybe Jesus doesn't love this guy. But Jesus absolutely does care about him. He loves him, but he's just simply refusing to get involved in a squabble over money. Now, the reason why Jesus is refusing to get involved in a squabble over money is because Jesus sees the real problem here. He sees the real danger to this man's soul. You see, this man believed that he had a money problem. And he would define his money problem the way that perhaps many of you would define your money problems. He didn't have enough, or he wasn't getting what he thought he should get. That's the way that most of us tend to define our money problems as well. But Jesus understands that that isn't really this guy's money problem. You see, this guy's money problem is that his money has too much of his heart. And Jesus loves him too much to try to resolve a money problem that this guy doesn't actually have. And incidentally, it's quite possible that many of us here in the room have the same money problem that this guy has. We may think it's that we don't have enough money. We may think that it's that we're not getting the money that we think that we deserve. But in actuality, it really could be that money has too much of our heart. So in the next verse, Jesus continues and we read, then he said to them. So Jesus turns from addressing this man specifically and he turns to address the crowd of thousands of people, because what Jesus is about to say, he understands that this isn't just a problem that this man deals with. This is a problem that most people deal with. This is a common issue. This is a common problem. So he addresses everybody, and then we read, he says, watch out. That phrase there, watch out, is strongly worded. If you and I were to be there on this particular day and we were to hear Jesus say this and we were to watch Jesus as he said it, we would be able to tell from the tone of his voice and his body language that Jesus was serious as a heart attack when he says this. Watch out. And then, just in case we missed it, he issues a double warning. He says, be on your guard. Watch out, be on your guard. And then he becomes specific against all kinds of greed. So Jesus desperately, urgently warns us to be careful about greed. Now, what is greed? Well, greed can be defined this way. Greed is an intense desire to get more and more stuff. Greed is when you and I live our lives in the pursuit of more. Someone once defined it this way, and I love this definition, but greed is the assumption that it's all there for my consumption. I think that's a great working definition. It's when it comes to the money and the stuff that you and I have, that we just live our lives with this obvious or not so obvious assumption that it's all there for us. And Jesus issues a double warning regarding that stuff, which I believe means that we should pay attention. And here's part of why we should take this seriously. Because Jesus never once in the Gospels ever cried wolf. There's never a single instance in the gospel, any of the Gospels, where Jesus said that something was dangerous where there was no danger. When Jesus tells you, watch out for this, you got to be careful for this. When it comes to greed, you need to be on maximum alert. Jesus is serious, and we should take him seriously too. Now, why is Jesus warning us about greed and the various types of greed that can make its way into our heart undetected? Well, that's why. The reason why Jesus is saying this is because greed is sneaky. It can get in there without us ever knowing it. Think about when you have your times of confession with God. You know, chances are, when you think about the times you've confessed your sins to God, if I were a betting man, here's what I would bet. Most of you have not confessed greed, have you? Greed is something that we don't tend to think that we're guilty of, because for some of us, it's because we have a caricature in our mind of what a greedy person is. A greedy person, for some of us, we kind of picture a guy who's sitting in his basement like Scrooge McDuck counting his coins. For most of us, we think that greedy is something that only people who are rich can be, and very few of us actually think that we're rich. Although, I'll say this, when you compare yourself to the rest of our planet, you are. But most of us don't think that we're greedy. Because it's not obvious, is it? It's sneaky. I mean, when it comes to all the other sins, a lot of them are pretty obvious. If you're sleeping with somebody you're not married to, you don't sit around and wonder, am I committing adultery or not? It's pretty obvious. When you take something that doesn't belong to you, you don't sit around and wonder, am I stealing or not? Or if you lied to somebody, you don't normally sit around and go, gosh, am I a liar or not? But when it comes to greed, it's incredibly sneaky, and sometimes it's hard to detect when it's actually there. So I want to take just a few minutes and ask you some diagnostic questions. Because Jesus was serious, and this stuff is hard to detect. I want to just ask some questions that hopefully you can use to try to sort through in your heart and your life whether this is actually an issue for you. So here's the first question. What do you daydream about? When you sit around and you imagine life and you imagine your future and the things you want to do and how you want things to go, what do you daydream about? Do you obsess or do you daydream about money? Or do you frequently think about the next thing to buy, the next trip to make, or the next experience to have? When you daydream about it, is it all for you? If it is, my friends, chances are, I love you, but you're greedy. Here's another question. What do you fear losing the most? I mean, outside of your kids. What do you fear, or your wife or your husband? What do you fear losing the most? Would the loss of your possessions or financial security shake your trust in God? If you lost the house, if you lost the car, if you lost that trip, that vacation that you wanted to take, but you can no longer take it, if you lost some of that stuff, would it shake your trust in God? If it would, chances are you might be struggling with greed. Here's another question. Do you compare what you have with others? Is this a thing where you look around at other people, at the stuff that they have, the house, the cars, the lifestyle, the vacations, the clothes, all the toys that they have? Do you find yourself comparing yourself with others? And then how do you respond when you see others with more? Deep down inside, does it bother you that others have more than you? If it does, you might be greedy. Here's another question. Do you trust God enough to give generously even when things feel tight financially? And I know this is a tough question for many of you in the room today because you're government workers, and some of you have been furloughed already, and some of you are planning to be furloughed. You might be furloughed later on this week, or you're probably going to be furloughed at some point, and the money's going to stop and it's going to get tighter. And my question is as money gets tighter, do you continue to look for ways to be generous? Or do you use it all for you? Do you trust God to be generous? Or do you stop trusting God with the ability to be generous? If you stop finding or looking for ways to be generous, even if finances are tight, you might be greedy. Here's another question. If someone looked at your bank account, what would they say that you love the most? If they look at the way that you spend money, because that's an undeniable proof of priorities right there. If they looked at the way that you spend your money, would they come to the conclusion that God's a priority for you? Would they come to the conclusion that people outside of your family are important to you? Or would they come to the conclusion that you are the most important thing to you? Money doesn't lie. Here's another question. Do you feel discontent with what God has already provided? Let's go ahead and acknowledge something here in the room right now. The provision that God has given each one of us in this room is different. There's some people in this room who have been provided, God has given more to. There's some people that God has given less to. But when it comes to whatever it is that God has given you, do you walk around and you walk through life with this low-level, low-lying discontent over it? Is there a lack of gratitude for God's provision in your life? If there is, You're greedy. Here's another question. Y'all are going to wonder when I'm done with these, aren't you? Do you secretly admire people who have wealth more than those who are faithful but have less? When you think about the people in this world that you admire, the people in this world that you want to be like, are they the people who are successful by our world's standards? They have more money, they have more stuff, they have a different lifestyle. Or is the person you admire most, or the people you admire most, the men and women of God who faithfully serve him but may have less? My friends, I want you to understand, if the person or the people you admire the most are in this category, you're probably greedy. Here's another question. How often do you ask God? Just be honest with yourself. Do an honest evaluation. How often do you ask God how he wants you to use what you have? When that paycheck comes in, when money comes your way, when you go home and you look at the stuff that God has provided for you, how often do you ask him what he wants you to do with what he has provided? Here's another question. When was the last time you gave sacrificially? In other words, you gave in such a way that something actually cost you comfort or convenience. When was the last time you were generous in a way where it costed you in your lifestyle in some way? Where you had to adjust something in order to do it? If it's been a while, I love you. I promise you I don't mean it mean. But you're probably greedy. You see how sneaky this stuff is? This is why Jesus says, watch out, be on guard against all kinds of greed. And then he follows it up by saying, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Translation, here's what he's saying. Your life doesn't equal, your worth does not equal your net worth. He's saying your quality of life is not determined by how much money and how much stuff you have. Your value is not determined by your net worth, by your bank account, by the type of house you live in, by the type of car you drive, or the type of vacations you go on. Now, the wild thing is I think that most of us, we actually believe this is true. I think deep down inside, we know our life really doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions. But here's why Jesus says this, because greed convinces us it does. Greed convinces us that we'll never be happy, we'll never be fulfilled, we'll never truly live life if we don't have the money and if we don't have the stuff. And almost always it's more than we currently have. So we end up on this cycle of this endless pursuit of more. And then to further his point, in the next verse, Jesus decides to tell the parable. Finally, we're getting to it. Some of you are wondering. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So Jesus begins his parable by introducing us to a man who is rich. He's a farmer, and because he has just received a massive bumper crop, he is even wealthier. And if you and I were to sit down with this farmer and we were to ask him, look, how did you become so wealthy? What are the tricks? What are the things that you do? What's the secret for me to get what you have in life? Do you know what he would probably tell us? I work hard and I earned it. I got up every day earlier than some other people. And I went out to work and I plowed the fields and I planted the seeds and I tended to the soil and I brought in the harvest and I worked later than most other people did and I made some good financial decisions and I planned really, really well and I just disciplined myself. If you and I were to sit and talk to this guy, he would say that he came across his money the same way that most of us believe that we got our money too, that we just worked hard and we earned it. Now that's what that guy would say, but Jesus actually sees it different. I want you to notice that Jesus says it's the ground of a certain rich man, that the ground yielded. In other words, here's what Jesus is saying. Despite what this man might think about how he got it because he worked hard and earned it, it was actually God who gave him the harvest. It was God who made the ground fertile. It was God who sent the rain. It was God who caused the sun to shine. It was God who kept pests and pestilence and all that kind of stuff away. It was God who provided the harvest. It's God who gave this man his money. And I'd like to remind you, and I do it often, but I think it's important, I'd like to remind you that whatever money you have, no matter how large or small you may feel that it is, it comes from God. God is the one who caused you to be born in this country, the wealthiest country in the world. It's God who caused you to have the education you have and the experiences you have and the people in your life that shaped you and taught you and molded you and made you into who you are today and what you know how to do. It's God who gave you that job. It's God who gave you your intellect. It's God who gave you your abilities. It's God who gave you that business savvy. It's God who gives you the very breath in your lungs that you use to take advantage of all the other things that God has given you. Every single penny that you will ever hold in your hand or have in your bank account, it comes from God. And that's an important thing, because if we lose sight of that, we are on the path to becoming greedy people. This man lost sight of it, and it's how he became greedy too. So this man has this enormous bumper crop. He's rich. He becomes even richer. You might wonder, well, what is this guy going to do with it? So Jesus continues his story. Wow, that's not how it's supposed to go. Help. Soon. There we go. Well, that's not quite it either. Are we working? This is proof you can't trust technology. All right, let me have control. There we go. So what does this guy do? You would kind of expect that there would be some sort of prayer of gratitude for what God had provided. Or maybe you would expect that this guy would pray to God and ask for guidance for the things that God has provided him with. Or maybe you would expect that this guy would sit around and find some people who are godly and who are smart with finances and consult with them about how he should go forward. But this man doesn't do any of that. As we're going to read and discover in a few minutes, there's no plan to give any kind of offering of gratitude to God as an acknowledgement and an act of gratitude for an offering to God for what God has provided. He doesn't go and try to compensate the people who worked for him, who are a part of his success, as a way of thanking them for their involvement. He doesn't even look around in the community around him for people who are struggling and have needs and try to give to them. Instead, what this guy does is he has a conversation with himself, which is an indicator of how inwardly focused this guy is. He's incredibly selfish. He only cares about himself. And as we're going to discover in the next few verses, he just continues to use these personal pronouns. He says, I. And then he uses the word my a lot. My crops, my surplus, my barns. He even says my soul. But he's incredibly focused when it comes to selfish, when it comes to his life, and by implication also how he uses what God has given him. So he thinks amongst himself, and he asks himself, what shall I do? In other words, he asks himself this question: how can I use what I have for me? How can I use what I have for me? And this is the second step towards greed that this guy takes. Because he's asking fundamentally the wrong question. He's asking the question that feeds the greed that's consuming his heart. He should have been asking, how does God want me to use what he has provided? Every single one of us should be asking that question. But this guy asks, look, how can I use this for me? And I want you to, again, notice the personal pronouns. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, and then he talks about himself, that's super weird. You have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, rest, eat, drink, and be merry. He takes his previous wealth and the new surplus that he has, and he just decides, you know what? I'm going to live life the way I want. I'm going to use it all for me. You know, it's real easy when you and I read this man's story and we're paying attention to what we're paying attention to at this part in the story especially become really, really critical of this guy. It's really easy to see what he's doing and what he's thinking and what's driving him and go, man, what a terrible person. What a dirtbag. But I'd like to remind you that this guy is making the same decisions that you and I oftentimes make. The reason why Jesus tells this story is because he wants us to think through the fact that we might actually be this guy. When it comes to his money and the stuff that God has provided him, he asks himself the question, how can I use this for me? Which, by the way, is the way that most of us operate when it comes to the money that we have. When you get the paycheck, probably that's generally how most people operate. When you get more money that you didn't expect, maybe that tax income or the tax refund or money for your birthday or bank, or if you get a raise, what most of us do is we just try to figure out, how can we use this for me? How can I use this to get a bigger house, more square footage? How can I use this to renovate something? How can I use this to get that car I want? How can I use this to go on that vacation or to have that experience? And don't hear me wrong. There's nothing wrong with having nice houses, nice cars, and nice experiences. What we're talking about here, again, is an orientation towards life where you just assume that it's all there for your consumption. It's about the relentless pursuit of more that most of us find ourselves on. So Jesus in the next verse continues his story, and we read, but God said to him. And let me call a quick timeout here, because there's something that happens at this point in the story that I think is really cool. You may not think it's cool, but I do. So I'm going to tell you about it. This is, to my knowledge, the only parable where God shows up as a character in the parable and he speaks. Which means that should probably get our attention. So God shows up and he speaks and he says something that should cause all of us to sit up, pay attention, and to ask serious questions about our own lives. He says, you fool. You fool. Now, when God calls somebody a fool, that is serious business. You and I should take that seriously. Let me be clear. This man is not being called a fool because he was rich. Nowhere in the Bible are riches in and of themselves condemned. In fact, many of the people throughout the scriptures that we admire as heroes of the faith were extraordinarily wealthy in their day. Also, it's worth noting that at the very beginning of this story, Jesus was really clear that God gave this man his wealth. So he's not being called a fool because he's rich and he has nice things. He's also not being called a fool because he's evil or wicked or a sinner. There's no indication whatsoever in this story that he got what he got by terrible means. He didn't take advantage of people or use shady business practices. By all accounts, With the exception of his greed, this is an upstanding fella. The reason why he's being called a fool by God is because he failed to recognize the source of everything that he had. He failed to factor God into his financial decisions. The reason why he's being called a fool is because he lived his life in the pursuit of more as if it was all there for his consumption. That's why he's being called a fool. Now, if that isn't sobering, what Jesus says next, or what God in the story, as Jesus is telling, says next, should be even more sobering. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. He tells this rich farmer, who almost certainly thinks, based on the financial decisions that he's making, that he has a lot more life left. He probably thinks he has 5, 10, 15, 20 or more years left in his life. He tells him, look, tonight your soul will be demanded from you. That word demanded in the Greek is a language referring to kind of like a loan. And what Jesus is saying is your life will be called back kind of like a loan gets called in. You may think your life belongs to you, but it doesn't, just like your money doesn't belong to you either. This man has no idea that that night, at some point in the night, he's going to die. And this might sound a little bit morbid, but I want you guys to know, and I think we know this, but sometimes we need to be reminded of it, is that just like the man in this story, you one day will die. I've looked at the statistics. They're pretty staggering. 100% of us will die. No exceptions. And here's what I think is going to happen. When most of us die, when that actually happens, probably for most of us, we'll think we have more time left. As a pastor, I do somewhere around 15 to 20 funerals a year. It kind of fluctuates. And what I've noticed is that for most of these people that I do funerals for, most of them thought they had more time. If you were to go talk to them a couple days or a week or a month before they passed away, they probably would have thought that they had more time. And what I want you to understand is that there are some of you under the sound of my voice right now that chances are pretty high in the next year, I will do your funeral. Or you might come to mine. All of us are sitting here today thinking, whether we know it or not, that we have more time that most of us, or maybe even some of us, may not have. So then, God in the story asks a really important question. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? When you die, who's going to get what you got? Can I tell you the answer? Somebody else. Somebody else. It'll go to somebody else. It'll go to somebody maybe who didn't earn it. It'll go to somebody who may not appreciate it or value it. It may go to somebody else who may use it differently than you would want or prefer. It may even go to a bunch of somebody else's who have to fight over it, and because they can't agree, even though they're family and should love each other anyway, because of that money and stuff, they'll fight and they'll never talk to each other again. It will go to somebody else. And that's 100% true for every single one of us. So then Jesus pulls outside of the parable, and here's what he says. Well, he didn't say that. There we go. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. What Jesus is saying in this verse is he's saying, listen, what happened to the farmer in the story can happen to you too. If you, like the farmer in the story, live your life on the pursuit of more, if you, like the farmer in the story, operate as if it's all for your consumption, what happened to the farmer can happen to you too. In this verse, Jesus seems to give us one of two options. You and I can spend our life laying up treasures for ourselves. Houses with more square footage, more trips to the golf course, faster, nicer cars, more hunting gear, trips to the game, cool vacations, lattes that cost $15 nowadays. That's ridiculous. We can spend our life storing up treasures for ourselves, or we can become rich towards God. Now, what Jesus is inferring in this verse is that it's almost impossible to do both at the same time. We have to pick the priority. Are we going to be rich towards God, or are we going to build up treasure for ourselves? So I'd like to, with that in mind, I'd like to leave you guys with a final question. And here's the question, assuming it'll come up. Here we go. Since everything must go, and because one day you will go, where will everything go before you do? Since everything must go, and it will because one day you will go, where will everything go before you do? Will you live your life pursuing more and more and more and more things that you can't take with you, that you'll leave behind? Or will you be rich towards God? Will you live your life with an acknowledgement that all of it comes from Him? And will you seek His direction on what He wants you to do with what He has provided? My friends, he who dies with the most toys does not win. But he who lives his life to be rich towards God, that person wins. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for your goodness in our life. Lord, far too often we spend our time comparing what you've provided other people compared to what you've provided for us. God, far too often we're dissatisfied with the level of provision that you have given us. God, we oftentimes forget that all of it comes from you, and we don't seek your guidance on how to use what you provided. God, I pray that you would forgive us for that. I ask that you would guide us, that you'd help us to be on constant alert against the greed that's so prevalent in our world and so easily sneaks its way into our hearts and lives. God, I pray as your people, we would be a people who are rich towards you. And Father, I pray these things in your name. Amen. Would you stand with us, please?
Lord, you are more precious than silver, and Lord, you are more costly than God, we just thank you so much for who you are and all that you give us. God, you are worthy of all of our praise. You have given us the great gift of salvation, and nothing, no riches, no things, no stuff could ever compare to that gift. You are worthy. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Will you continue to sing with us? It was my cross you bore, so I could live in the freedom you died for. And now my life is yours, and I will sing in your goodness forevermore. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. And now my shame is gone. I stand amazed in your love undeniable. Your grace goes on, and I will sing of your goodness forevermore. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise. Worthy is your name. Be exalted now in the heavens as your glory fills this place. You alone deserve our praise. You're the name above all names. Be exalted now in the heavens as your glory fills this place. You alone deserve our praise. You're the name above all names. Be exalted now in the heavens as your glory fills this place. You alone deserve our praise. You're the name above all names. Be exalted now in the heavens as your glory fills this place. You alone deserve our praise. You're the name above all names. Worthy is your name, Jesus. You deserve the praise.
Wow, well, we were really challenged, given a lot to think about this week, weren't we? So next week, we're going to continue in our sermon series, More to the Story, and it's actually going to be our last one in the series, so I hope you'll be able to attend. Also next week, at the end of this service, we're going to host a fundraising lunch, tacos, so you're going to want to come, and it's going to be to benefit the youth camps for this summer. It'll be $10 a person, $30 for the entire family max. Also, one last thing, make sure you fill out your nomination forms and then just drop those off in those black boxes I talked about earlier, or give it to someone on the hospitality team, yellow lanyards. Also, if you want to pray with somebody or you still want to talk about something that God spoke to you about during this today's sermon, those yellow lanyards will be more than ready to pray for you and over you. Church, hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.